what of course comes off horribly at the time, nonetheless, ages well. And I lost some footage, or the clips are out of order, so I think a tentative title would actually be a circle of stumbling blocks, something about the loop that I'm caught in this discussion. And what seems brass may time transmute to gold. One more, that stupidity might shine a light like wine, lead us ways whether we'd never had. Science wants to dominate nature, and thus it can't possibly correspond to her. Thus it fails to achieve its goal of correspondence to her, naming and knowing her laws. If science fails to achieve its goal of correspondence to nature, then we're at a fork in the road. We can fail to question the goal as we say science doesn't achieve it, and try to do better. Try to achieve a philosophy, a knowledge, a science that better carries out the value of correspondence to reality. But I said we're at a fork in the road. We can question the goodness of the goal of correspondence to reality. The first option among the two we say is to try to improve upon science, to try to achieve a science that's not science, a new science better than the science, the old science maybe. That's the first pathway that shares or co-values the value of truth, loyalty to something, correctness with directness. That was the first path. Denial of science that it's tried to achieve its goal, because the natural world is something wild, untamed, chaotic. We need something disorderly, even irrational, to approximate her. And science itself, we need to remake the world again, to be more exact to the world. This confused where, what, or what, where, a kind of being like reality that hovers between two categories of question. Just a second possibility among maybe many, maybe none. And the second possibility is questioning the goodness. Is this goal good, or what ought its rank to be among the good goals? And I want to throw that out there, put these questions up for discussion. The scientist had said that his science is true because it predicts motion, and the opponent may be one who loves why, he asks why, as opposed to science. Science is true to its goal, then it's achieved its goal, or it's true with respect to its goal. But the scientist in the dialogue is trying to achieve absolute power, maybe the reins of the state, not necessarily Washington or Paris, but the cosmos and the consent of those who agree that we, or the we's, plural, the nations ought to agree in what is most agreeable, that those things which can be counted and measured and so on. And of course, coming back to the philosophy of Leo Strauss, who the opponent says back to the scientist, true to its goal, to be sure, which in general is control over nature, which it can no longer name, as though replacing world, reality, or universe with nature, the green, the rivers, the jungle, the bacchanal, as though that somehow the goal, that some confused where what. This is an elephant, maybe made of brass or faded gold. It's something, for sure, and that, as it's something, it's what thing. It's what thing, not nothing. What thing is it? It's an elephant. It's also this particular elephant. I don't know of any other elephants in its likeness, so in that sense it's an individual. Maybe of this we could even ask who of this. Now, I can distinguish it from this camel made of gold, maybe, or brass, or some baser metal. Certainly not the kind of metals that would make up the stars, say nothing of the noble gases and so on. These could be distinguished from others, but if I say something like world, universe, how do you distinguish it from others? If something can't be distinguished from others, as this elephant can be from this camel in my left hand, how does it really qualify for thinghood? And with that predicate of thinghood in mind, the same could be said of reality. Is reality anything at all? Can I distinguish one reality from another? Can I distinguish one universe from another? People commonly say that there is the multiverse, that there are multiple universes, all the while evaluating this manyness against one implicitly dominating spatial totality. In the phrase "there is." I have yet to criticize. I have yet to criticize the flaw in the opponent of the scientist, the anti-scientist's argument. Nietzsche spoke of an Antichrist. Might we also, or instead, herald the advent of the anti-scientist? Yes? No? Instead, what I would try to do is recognize that science is knowledge, and that knowledge in general is going to be part of the means, method, middle for achieving any goal. And goals are good, and achieving goals is good. This is consistent with what Nietzsche says in The Will to Power, that we're always trying to achieve goals or greater power, even if we pretend to be against power in general. It's really a speaking against a particular power, and thus the faction supposedly against all factions is just a special case of a faction, but a disingenuous one, or inauthentic, which is potentially very very dangerous for any faction or any tradition, even among traditions. So as I had said, I think the one path forward, for example, against science is really to qualify it. Say we're opposed to spatial fundamentalist science, for example, the kind of science that won't humble itself and just say it's knowledge, but it's a kind of knowledge. It pretends to speak for all kinds of knowledge, whether this fact, that fact, this branch of knowledge, such as music theory or mnemonics, different branches of knowledge or different arts, how to carve such an elephant, or I don't know, make such an elephant in the forge, and make and improve the lighting. And yeah, if you translate from Latin, and we don't know Latin for the most part, we English speaking people in the United States, maybe in Europe as well. Even though we use tons of Latin words, for the most part, our knowledge of Latin, our deep acquaintance with the syllables of the language, it's extremely weak. To some extent, the syllables of the words might motivate us. They might. I'll pick up the thread. I threw a ball over there. It's like I had to do this. I have to do this. Maybe something like this. I threw it over there, but I'm chasing it. I'm trying to stay in the camera. That's the way the thoughts go. And have this as I don't know what it's called actually, but it's red, it's blue. It's something that you put a glass of water on, so it doesn't leave rings of water on the desk. And it was on the desk, on a blue desk, and now it's over there. It's not here, it's there. And I could call it whatever the name of this thing. I could call it this. I don't know the name, but this. Other one's that. Continue this digression, though. I think in modern languages, the distinction between this and there is become meaningless or less meaningful because of the implicit dominance of absolute space in the phrase there is. Although in German we say es gibt, but in French, il y a, Spanish, hay un elefant, what? En la mano. Hay un elefant en la mano, right? Yeah, anyway, to oppose science as that other city or community demands a monopoly. Call it maybe Cartesian science, but I love Descartes. But call it Cartesian science, call it spatial fundamentalism, a kind of credo that the most valuable knowledge is of anything, is not even of anything at all, because we don't care about the differences between these. We care how much, where, when, but it doesn't matter what thing, whether God, man, whether I'll show you something. Where this book is even more important for the spatially fundamental scientist. It's more fundamental in the title, for example, the language, the author. These things are mere attributes. Reduce them to data, send them over the wire. For example, this pen is red, and it actually writes in red as well. When you write letters on the page and you write individual letters, you don't hit a key where it is to make an already prefigured sign. You redraw the sign. You make it anew as the artisan himself makes a shoe or a table. But I forgot. Somehow I remember. So this pen, the red, what is the wavelength of red, the color red in angstroms, for instance? How would you measure a color like red and compare it to another color from which it's different. Red and blue are distinct colors, but you can make them uniformly comparable by, reducing a kind of attribute. I'm not saying the attribute, but it would be a whatness or an essence, like a who. Oh, that's a painting by Michelangelo for sure, if that's the go on. So red and blue, and the desire, the value is to reduce sensual knowledge, what you actually see, touch, smell, taste, hear. Whatever you take in through the senses or intuit, a motive to run, jump up as well. It's not just passive observation that is animus. Animus in motion. Emotion is just intention that's too weak to become action. With this, we're losing the thread. So yes, how many angstroms? How many angstroms? Something countable, whether discrete or continuous, and I mock this, but it has its use for the prediction of motion. It doesn't matter that this is an elephant. If I throw it, and I'm not going to throw it, it's kind of heavy, but you could predict based on the weight, force, I don't know, momentum, whatever, in the physics of uniform translation in space and in one absolute space, where it would end up, how many grams, however you would measure weight. It's like with food. You not only measure the calories, but before that you talk about carbs, fat, grams of protein, and so on, with disregard for the individuality of the food, the micronutrients, the soil in which it's grown, and so on. And we have the same problem in the natural languages, that a knowledge of grammar doesn't confer sufficient experience to actually practice the language. Though I do like a quantitative approach to language, at least to measure quantity of sentences experienced, for example. But we'll go back to this. Moose here is that I digress, but spatially fundamentalist science. But we need to get back to the dialogue. So let's put this huge stack of 20 different arguments. We'll move this stack to the side, and we'll come back. And here we are. The opponent, the opponent of a strictly Cartesian science, of spatial fundamentalism, of where priority, of course, opposes the credo among the questions at the very outset, before even the birth of knowledge. We have to ask, and we only ask because we not only have, but are desire, or some third option beyond having desire and even being desire, but acting. The opponent of spatial fundamentalism, he made a mistake, I think. He says against the scientist, throwing the ball back at him, he says, well, your science is true to its goal. But the scientist had just said that science is true because it predicts motion. He implies that its goal was to predict motion, as though, another speaker in the dialogue later says, why its prediction of motion from where A to where B, A to B, on this map of uniform things, not different landmarks like, I don't know, Big Ben, the Louvre, and so on. So why is prediction of motion the imperative of mankind? So what not only all nations ought to do, but the one nation that is the cosmic state, that's never named, but supposedly envelops the whole of humanity, which is why universalist ideologies like democracy are so aggressive, whether they make war or expand their borders. They can always justify war by treating citizens of a foreign country, or the society, not the state, to observe that classic distinction. They can say the society is being abused by the government, and this society, or these people, the people, are already their people, the same people. Is it... Side note on this, part 26, what is humanity? Merely one species at hand, or among others of animals, or the agent of speaking, if speaking is what distinguishes man from the animals, to say nothing of a kind of zoology or theology. It's actually a fairly important question. If speaking is not merely something, some act in space, but itself is a fundamental individual action, some kind of chemistry between I and you and beyond. If we just ask a question, is all change motion, and thus is all change in space? So action is completely subordinate to where. Now, what is the question word for action as such, not constrained by possibility? Whether the grid lines of the Cartesian coordinate system, or sufficient force, sufficient mass, or critical mass, rather, the why, or the cause of the action, whether it's the whither of the action. Actually, the whither might be the fruit that you seek, or the particular goal, or that fancy sports car that you really want to buy, so you work hard. Or the whence, which may be some general desire for happiness or for power, or an appetite for hunger, which may be for fruit, maybe for fish. It's the lie that all changes in space. The opponent of Cartesian science, he says true to its goal, but then he mistakes its goal for control over nature. Why not control nature? Why not increase power? Yes, give back some of the power if being in a more hostile environment forces you to metamorphose, that you yourself become greater. Give up either the ideologies or even the tools so you can, I don't know, evolve into some Superman not even in need of machinery. Case in point, if your immune system were sufficiently strong to fight any virus, why would you need, I don't know, maybe a vaccine or some medicine to fight virus? And opens a whole, a can of worms? I don't know. But I would like to talk about fasting on this channel as well. The body rediscovered as, as the fundamental thing, because it is what you are, but the body is not primarily something in space, because that's a category of the mind with a bias of the relative values of the questions. Think about the questions as doors leading into the palace of knowledge, and which one you take determines what you know and whether you remember at all why you know. I had wanted to say again and again that the philosopher, I guess, or the student even, who opposes the establishment scientist sitting in his chair, he makes a mistake. He accuses I think he's trying to come up with a better model of nature that's more true to nature than science, because it's mathematical, mechanical. Oh, nature's organic, it's not mechanical. Oswald Spengler, can talk about that. All along, but the thing at the outset of investigation is this confused where, when? Is it a camel? Is it a camel? Is it an elephant? At the outset of bringing in knowledge, like you have fruit or a harvest, agricultural metaphor, bringing in the crops. If a thing that has to be accepted is at the heart or is at the base of knowledge that to be achieved for whatever reason, goodness, power, then it's bad. And I think having questions, knowing that you're going to be ranking questions and asking why these ranks are as they are, I think it's a kind of deeper skepticism that may nonetheless empower the greatest possible actions that have ever been committed in the history of humanity. Why are we repeating ourselves? Why do we let ourselves be caught in this loop, this fear of not having sufficiently elaborated? Well then, so in the fifth note, which is like the fourth, because we were talking about stages of domination of nature, I guess. So the opponent of science is saying that, science is having a mechanical model. It's just like this taming of cattle, dogs, and so on, just as storing food through the winter overcomes subservience to the seasons, and the likewise. And I don't see why that's bad. I'm not really reliving the vibe, but if you want to enumerate this student philosopher, that's my name, opposed to traditional science, do we want to say it's bad because it's old and what's new is good, bad is old, and we can't talk about good and bad? We have to couch or conceal these terms and temporal distinctions? After a man, it's Descartes. Or better yet, I think, name it after its beloved question, where, but also how many? How many cases of some kind of virus within 100,000? How many of a count in a greater count? 100,000 what? 100,000 books? 100,000 people? No. This entity, this pure number, is better than anything that possibly lives. These things are hard to talk about, but I'm also very, very bad at talking. I have no memory. I've never mastered the art of presentation. Very few things in my life that I've done well, but I have fasted and I can play Warsaw Concerto, maybe at a B-level amateur pianist, as such an amateur. But one possibility of control, greater control of nature, that had interested me and that I thought was only achievable having given up spatial science, the science of how many, and so on. Greater power, a greater science of insight might be a response to this question. For instance, the story that an apple fell, let's just say an elephant fell on Isaac Newton's head, so we thought of gravity. The thought of gravity occurred to him. It came to him from where? And this was the problem with the domination of spatial thought, that it makes mental life so hard to describe because all these metaphors of here and there and where, in the head, they don't really apply. In the head. But you're already incapitating and accepting the fundamental distinction of internal and external. You're letting space adjudicate from the outset. The question is, if anyone's thought of anything great, and I don't know why Newton has to be the fundamental example. Maybe Archimedes, who shouted eureka, just a sudden insight. What's the cause of that act as an action, whether it's in the head, whether it's of the body, wherever it is, but also whatever, whoever does it. Maybe action is more important than both the setting and the actor. But just to continue this, this kind of trans-scientific metaphor, if we, whoever we are, this city, not that one, I don't know, maybe me and you, if we knew the cause of great insights, that Schopenhauer, for instance, realized that the thing in itself of which Kant spoke is really the will to live. That one drop of dye, that one drop of red, that tinctures, is that a right word? Tinctures the solution of water, gives it the incarnadine color red, or as Macbeth in his guilt imagines the ocean red, his hands only being those things though red. So this kind of trans-scientific question, if we could understand why we think what we think and why we're more fecund in other moments than others, because we all too often find ourselves in a position of waiting for fertilization. And you could ask Freud or Camille Paglia to elaborate on that for you. So a final thought. So, when I say ask Freud or ask Camille Paglia, why don't I venture to offer the sexual metaphor explicitly? Because I do think it's just that, but I don't mean to concede to the opposite dominance of space at the same time. The x-coordinate, the y-coordinate, longitude, latitude, the measurement of the wavelength, and so on, the cult of where as absolute space and how many. But I think the dominant metaphorical pattern too of sexual imagery and metaphor becomes a kind of excessive and limiting homogeny. One wants to reduce the many to the one or the few, and it's invariably the same thing all the time. It's not only boring, but with one final thought. And it was like this, but still moving in the moving within. That's another spatial. The domination of prepositions is just incredible, and I think some supra-spatial thought that puts the question where in its place, not radically negates it, because not only wouldn't work, but it would surrender the fruits of the desire for the prediction of motion to build rockets and so on. I don't know. Weapons come to mind, and war, which actually brings the opposite question, whether we'd ever want to wage that kind of war. It's somewhat of a regret that war isn't possible, and that we have these hidden battles in the media, the press, this kind of constant bombardment of thought through subliminal messages, advertisements. Not going to name any news agencies in public, and you should question even a desire for the news. Anyway, why? I mean, why not the olds? That's really what prayer is, the repetition of what's good. And yeah, so the final thought is it's a question that why not become that mind? So if in computer science the great open problem is the P versus NP question, polynomial and non-polynomial time problems. These are two sets of problems. At the hard problems, which may include factoring a number. So can you write a computer program that efficiently factors a very large number into the prime numbers out of which it may have been made by multiplication? So 2 times 2 is 4, 7 times 5, that's 35, if I hear correctly. But with larger numbers, the problem becomes very, very difficult, almost intractable for computers, and it is a basis of cryptography. But that aside, if you could conceive of a mind that could write an efficient algorithm or program to factor 2 numbers, rather than tackle the problem directly, become that mind that 1,000 years hence could unravel the problem, for whom it would appear clear as day. That is, the solution would appear clear as day. The intuition, whatever that is, intuition, reason, 2 faculties, but become that mind. This is a similar line of thought in the unification of physics, general relativity, theory of gravity, and quantum mechanics. Since these super small particles are true things, with the protons, translate that, you get firsts. Doesn't sound that good in English, loses its mysticism. So one technique of skepticism is merely to anglicize, Anglo-Saxon, ify, that's Latin, the mysteries, or the taina, by which science operates. It's a kind of hijacking of conscience, which was once devoted to God. And so science has said, again, I was going to say it earlier, but it's invoked the way the monotheistic God is. It's invoked I'm just going to say monotheistically, even though the genus we're talking about is not the gods anymore. But you could say monolith, monocosmos. The other terms, they don't hit deep in the mind, to, again, as though it were a lake, and as though spatial depth were the good thing, the strongest degree. I don't know. Unify the 2 disparate branches of physics. You could try to solve the problem mathematically, or you could just become a mind capable of solving it. And it might seem like a very indirect path, but you would put yourself in a position for success. For example, I would expect that if you were to study a Romance language, you could go, like Spanish or French, you could go directly into that language. Go directly into what pattern of thought am I using, although I claim to be trying to get away from. But you could go directly at them, into them, and so on. Or you could hold off a bit, or maybe even simultaneously study Latin, which invites all kinds of mechanical metaphors, like assembly language, knowing the language of the Intel chip, the Intel architecture. So, for example, DVD John from Norway figured out how to reverse engineer some Sony encryption on the original DVDs. I think he was sued, or the great corporation tried to sue him. I'm not sure if they won, but he had deep knowledge of the assembly code, so he could figure out, because that's the language that all executed programs, they are reduced to that. They're not even compiled, but maybe assembled into this lower level tongue. And but anyway, it's obvious, not just for the vocabulary, not just for the vocabulary, that a knowledge of Latin would give you the soil, would make you capable of receiving any Romance language. And not only that, I lost something. Probably going to run out of memory at some point in QuickTime. But I think the reason to study Latin is because the ancients valued what. They would rather ask what before, where. Before in the sense of rank. To them, the question of what, or genus and species, was, I think, obviously much more important than reality, which is a word that is 3 steps removed from something. The poor way to put it, but in the beginning you had res, or re, in re, that's in an ablative. In this matter, I don't know, but res, it's a fifth declension Latin noun. Res, it commonly means things, usually very often res publica, so hence the English word republic, or res publica, the public thing, literally. And you can degrade that thing into the attribute or adjective, or adnomen, something attached maybe to a name or a noun. You can talk about the real. But now that you've gone from something, I don't know, fairly concrete, although abstract, res, thing, now you have an adjective, real, that may describe a thing, or it may not. It may be used to partition things into real things and not real things, or fake, for instance. So now, starting with an adjective, maybe like beautiful, and we'll appoint a task to just completely fix this, clean out these stables. They're full of manure, my mind, really. And again, fasting would actually do that the natural way, not so much through exercise, effort, and so on. But we're talking about reality, we're criticizing the term. It's basically a reification of an adjective derived from what I think is a more concrete term in my based on my limited knowledge of Latin. So now, what's the problem? What's the problem with that? Well, what is it? How do you compare one reality to another? But I can compare an ant to a spider, an ant to a bee, even a mule to a horse. Some things that are very close. I'm not sure exactly how a farmer would do it, but he knows the distinguishing mark. And the same thing can be said about res and re. In the ablative, I know how it ends, the ending. The suffixes are like the antennae or the manes, or like flamboyant male parts showing themselves. Close the loop, maybe. I don't know. Translated into English. So thing, thingly, and thingliness. So that's reality. The reality is the commonly used phrase to bypass reason and just hit the dog or the reptile part of the brain, which is the seat of conscience. And it largely works. You're not living in the real world. It's a mode of admonishment. What you're doing is bad, but the speaker is one who has deprived himself of moral judgments, supposedly, because everyone who morally judges others is bad. I don't know if I closed the loop, but yeah, thing, thingly, and thingliness. So the thingliness is, knowledge ought to correspond. I'm not sure how to translate that, but ought to talk with, respond, to answer with. Knowledge ought to answer with thingliness is the translation of science, or any knowledge. The best knowledge, or what's best, is correspondence to reality. So speaking of colors as though they were real, and not the count of the wavelength, that's less good, but we'll let these humans, we scientists will let these humans have their emotions and their love of colors and so on, but they're all moving around in space, just like electrons and bouncing around in space and so on, but quantum mechanics change. To overpack this even further, probably to constipate the video and make it unwatchable and unreviewable, but yeah, we had talked about the prerogative become that mind, as though the goals which are conditional upon spatial science are even worth achieving, that they're actually better than metamorphosis into a god. But these magics, these idols, these artifacts, knowing this formula, that theorem, just become great, become the action, the individual action that you're meant to carry out. If your name is John, then ascend from a human being named John into an action that we might call John, or even leave anonymous, notwithstanding the multiplicity of men named John. But for example, the sun shines in a very particular way. Of course, it's the video, and I would say the show must go on, but some devil on my shoulder saying, well, there in the one universe are very many stars, just like the sun. So the action of the sun, the sunshine is not a unique action, but I guess general advice I can give to you, but maybe everybody, maybe not. It doesn't have to be. That's the thing. Is to become that shining, I guess. And it's probably the unpacking of intentions and their from their long storage in the cold cellar into action, into heat, may endanger you. And again, I'm going to have to appoint a task to talk about this as well, about persecution, although somebody, of course, has already talked about this. But I think reducing the gap between, your everyday self and your avatar is really the key. Key to what? I don't know, something between power and happiness, but I'm upset by my subservience to spatial metaphors. This isn't just a matter of language. I think this would be the case in every modern language, and I can't speak Latin, of course, because reading and understanding either what comes to you or it comes to you, if you can simulate that with software. Comes to your eye, for example, to your ear, you listen, or you read it. Obviously not the same thing as generating. This actually alludes to the P versus NP polynomial versus non-polynomial time problems in computer science. If generation of natural language is an NP hard problem, it's just of the same hardness as unraveling the secrets of cryptography, for instance. The unpacking of intentions and their from their long storage in the cold cellar into action, into heat, may endanger you. And again, I'm going to have to appoint a task to talk about this as well, about persecution, although somebody, of course, has already talked about this. But I think reducing the gap between, your everyday self and your avatar is really the key. Key to what? I don't know, something between power and happiness, but I'm upset by my subservience to spatial metaphors. This isn't just a matter of language. I think this would be the case in every modern language, and I can't speak Latin, of course, because reading and understanding either what comes to you or it comes to you if you can simulate that with software. Comes to your eye, for example, to your ear, you listen, or you read it. Obviously not the same thing as generating. This actually alludes to the P versus NP polynomial versus non-polynomial time problems in computer science. If generation of natural language is an NP hard problem, it's just of the same hardness as unraveling the secrets of cryptography, for instance. I think is that at some point, in my case, I'm not going to generalize, I don't need to, but having waited so long out of fear, what else is it, to publish anything in any form whatsoever, it kind of leads to a superfluid. I have all these notebooks, for example. I think it's good to speak from a prompt of a note. I don't like to speak in just isolation. And in the future, I want to talk about David Hume, maybe read another Kafka short story, for example, not just for SEO purposes to increase the quantity of views on the channel. I mean, what else is it? 1% of this has to be a risk of death. Immortality requires a risk of death. But I don't mean not dying. I mean being great, which may require dying. There is the risk of suffering physical violence to the body, of bleeding, becoming scarred, trampled to death, raped, and so on. And all these, and I guess that's the pathway to whatever the goal is. I'd use this idea of the avatar. A friend of mine had shared with me a video about memes. The speaker alluded to sexual personae, Camille Paglia's theme, of course, in the book from 1991. And anyway, if all your desires or dreams are in the freezer, how do you make meals? How do you make meals out of them? How do you realize these hopes and dreams? The car, the house, the watch of gold, and so on. And I don't think it's tawdry to talk about self-help in this regard. Maybe we are all equal. What do I know? Yeah, I'm trying to address. Anyway, I'm trying to address some problem of speaking openly and translating what's a private written culture into maybe only a semi-private oral culture instead. The